Committee of the whole will please come to order, you bunch of rowdy people. The first bill for first Senate file for our reading is Senate Joint Resolution 2. The reading clerk will please read in the bill.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, Convention of States, sponsored by Senator Whitman. A joint resolution requesting Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments to the United States Constitution as specified. Was referred to committee number 9, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Cooper, and Wasserberger. No, Senators Anderson and Rothfuss. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Chairman Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, they do so with a favorable consideration for Senate Joint Resolution 2, Convention of States.
And Chairman Anderson would like to explain the joint resolution to us.
Senator Beitman, I'm sorry. Yes.
Senator Beitman, the floor is yours. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the first day on the job, okay? Go ahead, Senator
Thank you,
Beitman.
Mr. Chairman. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Senate Joint Resolution number 2, Convention of States. This is a joint resolution requesting Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments to the United States Constitution. Typically, we see resolutions that just proclaim we're thinking a certain way or we want to see something happen. Well, this resolution actually does something. It's part of our constitutional process. There are 2 ways we can amend the Constitution of the United States under Article 5. Every way we've done it so far, all 27 amendments have been through Congress. Article 5 also provides another avenue for the very situation we find ourselves in right now. And that is when we have a runaway Congress and a runaway judiciary and a runaway executive branch in Washington, D.C. The states can get together and bypass Congress and get together and propose amendments to the Constitution. And that's what this bill does. So ladies and gentlemen, I'll walk you through the bill. Pages 1 through 2, we have our whereases. We can read those to ourselves. The meat of the bill is on page 2, section 1. This is the call for the Convention of States to propose amendments. This is what 15 other states have done. This language is identical to their call. It takes 34 states to get this thing going. Section 1, the legislature of the state of Wyoming applies to Congress under the provisions of Article 5 Constitution of the United States for the calling of a convention of the states, limited to proposing amendments to the Constitution that impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. So 3 things that are germane: power and jurisdiction of the federal government, limit the terms of office, and provide fiscal restraint. So those are the 3 areas that if we do get this convention called and all the states get together to meet and to discuss these amendments and start drafting these amendments, the amendments on the table will be dealing with fiscal restraints, whether we're looking at spending caps, whether we're looking at a balanced budget amendment, things of that nature, anything that limits the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and term limits, which is overwhelmingly popular amongst Democrats, Republicans, and independents. It's something that the whole country can actually agree on, that we need term limits, not just for Congress, but for the bureaucrats and the federal officials and federal judges. We need to drain the swamp, and the swamp's not going to drain itself. We've seen that. The way to do it is for the states to do it. And this is the only way possible that we can get a term limits amendment that actually has teeth, that actually limits the bureaucrats and not just the representation. Section 2 is kind of comes with the subject to the following reservations, if you will. An application on line 12, page 3, an application to Congress of the United States to call a convention pursuant to Article 5 for the purposes of proposing amendments to the Constitution confers no power to Congress other than the power to call. Romanet 2, Congress shall call an amendment convention only upon the receipt of applications for an amendment convention for the substantially same purpose. Remember those three things I outlined in section 1 from 2/3 of the legislatures of the several states. Number 3, Congress does not have the power or authority to determine any rules for the governing of the Convention of States, nor does it have the power to set the number of delegates. The power to name delegates remains exclusively within the authority of the legislatures of the several states. Number 4, by definition, a convention of the states is to propose amendments to the Constitution that states shall vote on the basis of one state, one vote. Number 5, a convention to propose amendments pursuant to this application shall be limited to considerations of the topics specified in the joint resolution and no other. Comes with an express understanding that any amendment that seeks to amend, modify, or repeal any provision of the Bill of Rights shall not be authorized for consideration in any matter. Number 6, pursuant to Article 5, Congress determine whether proposed amendments shall be ratified by the legislatures of several states or by ratifying conventions. The legislature of the state of Wyoming recommends that Congress select ratification by the legislatures of the several states. Number 7, the legislature of the state of Wyoming may provide further instructions to its delegates and may recall its delegates at any time for a breach of duty or a violation of the instructions provided to the delegates. Section 3 just goes on to say this is a continuing application until we hit 2/3 of the states or until we repeal or rescind this call. And section 4 calls on the Secretary of State to submit copies to those in Washington, D.C. Now, when I first voted on this, my freshman year in the House in 2017, our national debt was $19 trillion, and it was unfathomable at that time. And we heard the gnashing of the teeth and the crying about run away this, run away that, this thing can't be controlled, we can't do this. There's got to be a better way, we got to elect better people. So we did, we elected what we thought were the right people. Here we are, 2021, $28 trillion is the national debt today. 28 trillion. We are on the wrong track, ladies and gentlemen, and this thing is not going to fix itself. Burying our heads in the sand and hiding from this problem is only going to make it worse. The longer we wait, the worse it's going to get. It's already gotten worse in my short time in office, and we can't do this to our children. We cannot. We cannot let this country continue on this course to ruin. Our federal government is absolutely overstepping its boundaries with the aid of the Supreme Court. So in order to get these branches of government and restore federalism to this country, I believe an Article 5 Convention of States is the method to go. I think it's safer than nullification. We can do both at the same time, but we have to do something. We cannot just sit here and keep kicking the can down the road. So I know I'm probably not going to change too many hearts and minds today. Those of you that have been in office long enough, we've debated this thing to death. But I ask you to think about this and give it some thought. And I'll stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
We're on Senate Joint Resolution 4, discussion. Senator Salazar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to echo the same words of my colleague. I also was a freshman in the other chamber in 2017. But I support this. This country is in trouble with our national debt. And to those of you who have children and grandchildren, they're going to be left with the bill. This is something that I support. This is something that my constituency supports. And I will I will caveat my support by saying that there are those on the other side who I highly respect, who I agree with almost all the time with, and yet in this situation, there's a difference of opinion. But I do appreciate the civil discourse that we've had amongst ourselves of agreeing to disagree. But I believe that this is the right course for our state and for our nation. And I also would ask for your support in this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Go ahead.
I think you said we're on Senate Joint Resolution 4, but we're really on Senate Joint Resolution number 2.
You are correct. Thank you very much, Chairman Anderson. I'm getting in a hurry. That's the next one. Senate Joint Resolution 2. Further comments? Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this resolution, and I look at a landscape of America right now, and I think this resolution is needed more than it ever has. I think about, when our Constitution was formed and how divided our country was, and how we had great civil debate about the forming of a federal system of government as we moved away from the Articles of Confederation. And this tool was put in the toolbox. And you recall that the great compromise of the Constitutional Convention, one of the greatest ones, was the way that apportionment, or representation, was established in the United States Senate, giving each state 2 senators. And at the same time, the House was by population. That was an effort, a serious effort to balance the interests of the states. We had states that were more urbanized, more industrialized, and they were offset by larger states at the time, very large agrarian, big states with different interests. It was the different interests between these 2 kinds of states. It comes down today, the equivalent is what we might call a red state or a blue state. And trying to find the balance, as we have a system of government whereby it's a partnership between states and the federal government, with states being an equal part of that partnership and each state being equal in many aspects of that partnership. The 2 equivalent things in our Constitution are, of course, the Senate mentioned earlier. The second one is the Electoral College. The Electoral College preserves that even the small rural states, the reddest of the red, have some limited number of representation that weighs in and makes presidential campaigns and presidential contests winnable by this rural constituency that we belong to. We've seen that fall apart a little bit lately. And I think it's because we have not approached our differences between red and blue in a healthy manner. I think we're kind of falling into a trap. We're becoming redder while the rest of the nation is becoming bluer. We've watched our Congress and the Senate and the presidency all change to the other party. They're blue. We're red. We're becoming redder, becoming more insular, by having things like, let's nullify federal laws, even though it's never been done. And the Supremacy Clause puts the kibosh on that. So I've even had people write me and talk about secession. Seriously, let's join the other red states and secede from the Union. Really? What this comes down to is we have to use our legal means to go at the red versus blue, rural versus urban, different historical differences that this country has had since the beginning, and use the tools that our founders gave us in the beginning to address that. All this fear, we are so afraid of, you just name it, vaccines, it just goes on and on. It's not relevant, but we are just so reactionary. What about having thoughtful dialogue about how we work and balance this divide that has always been part of our country and will be as long as we hold together as one nation? And rest assured, Article 5 has been used before. Article 5 has plenty of safeguards. Do not let these fear mongers and emails you're getting from other states, you know, they're wacko. And they want to have you adopt a nullification, secede from the union, not enforce any federal laws, all of these things. No, let's use the tool that our founders gave us to sit down with our other states and decide on a future path to this country that restrains the federal government. It takes 2/3 of the states to issue a call. That call could be reversed at the very 11th hour if we don't like the way that it's coming together. But most importantly, the true safeguard is in the nation. Suppose they go nuts at the convention. It's nothing we could live with. Fine, we don't ratify it. 25% of the states can deny ratification. That's an amazing power that the states hold. And as they work to erode the Electoral College, believe me, there are lots of people after that one. The fact that each state has 2 senators seems to not matter too much anymore because we are not in the majority there. Maybe that's our own fault, but we're there. This is the only tool we have that is legal, rational, and thoughtful. Please vote yes.
Further discussion or questions? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Either on or for, against, just some questions I'd like to bring up and hopefully get some answers to. Really love and appreciate the bringer of this bill from Sheridan. But my question would be, who would send to this convention, Mr. Chairman? And then when we talk about limiting the federal government's power, we have amendment number 10. Just want to know how that comes into play. When it comes to term limits, my question would be, we have an educated electorate, you would think that they would be able to term limit anyone who's not doing or following our US Constitution. And then the balanced budget, just wondering if our Congress is not doing what we would like them to do in regards to our Constitution now, why would they follow amendment number 28? And then I'm wondering where Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 comes into play when we talk about a balanced budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions for the sponsor before we go back to the sponsor? Seeing none, Senator Blyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh,
Now
I
seeing
yield.
one, I see Senator Perkins. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple comments and then I do have a question. My question first is, with the emails I've been getting, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, that the seas will rise and the continents will clash and the air will catch on fire. And I need some, and so I would like the sponsor, if he would, to find some way to assure me that those things won't happen if this bill were to pass. But the other thing I would just share with the group is, with the Senate is, you know, we've been arguing these things. Those of us been here a little while. We've been arguing these things about at least, not every year, but at least more often than every other year. And Mr. Chairman, gosh, this must have been about 12 or so years ago. I was actually part of a delegation. We were getting really close on a balanced budget amendment about having enough states having to would have done that we actually about 30, if I remember right, about 34, 35 states sent delegates, and we all met at the Capitol in a neighboring state from which you could see the great briny inland sea from the steps of the Capitol. And so there were about 30 odd states of us, you know, that met there. And one of the things that we were doing, we were trying to outline what would happen if the Article 5 convention actually met. What would be the ground rules, and how would we do that? And I think there were about 7 or 8 of us from Wyoming that went down and attended that, and we spent a good couple of days actually hashing out. And when a convention meets, you have to actually hash out the rules. You got to have the rules, just like when we meet, we've got to hash out our rules, which we're going to be governed. And so that was the whole point, was to try and get a start on what those rules would look like in the event that we had the requisite number of states, that 2/3 of the states would actually vote to convene the Article 5 convention. And as we met, it was very clear very early that there were significant differences, and even getting to the rules is not going to be an easy task. What was the division? Some of it was red versus blue, but a lot of it was populist versus non-populist. In fact, as we were looking for the number of delegates and the vote count that you would have, we came to an impasse about how many votes per state would each state get. And in fact, the more populous states, about 4 or 5 of the most populous states, their representatives got up and left that meeting and walked out because the majority of the body would not agree to allow it to be a population represented. Your vote would be represented by the number of people you have in your state. And so it blew up. So what I came to the conclusion of that, Mr. Chairman, was that, one, it's not an easy task. It's a very heavy lift to even get to have a convention. 2 is, once you get to the convention, to have the rules that are going to govern you there is not an easy lift. There are many, many competing interests that will happen at those conventions. And the third observation I would make is, at the end, when you get to the end, whether a constitutional amendment is proposed, as we've done the last 27 amendments, they all came through Congress. But once you get to the fact that you've proposed amendment, whether it comes from Congress or whether it comes from an Article 5 convention, there are proposed amendments. They're not amendments, they're proposed amendments. And whichever way you go, whether you go through Congress or whether you go through an Article 5 convention, what's clear is that it takes the ratification of 3/4 of the states before that becomes law. And so as we do that, I really don't think that the fear that people have about this is any more founded than Congress. Congress could come up with whatever they want to come up with and propose as an amendment, as long as you can get the 2/3, just like we've done here. We've come up with some doozies over the years that we've done and gone out to the ballot, and some have been passed and some haven't. And so I don't fear, because I don't fear the people. I believe that I don't fear the people. I've never feared the vote of the people. When they have the right information, they make the right decision. And so, I think in long-winded fashion, I'm going to vote for this, not because there's in here I don't like. I also believe that when you get to the convention, we've talked about what's on the chopping block: popular vote for senators, and having senators be reflected in population, removal of the electoral college. There's been a number of things that have been proposed. Would those come up? Yeah, they might have come up. In the past, we actually passed a bill that if you went and you voted for anything or you voted to consider anything other than what was amended, we actually, I think, made it a felon, and we threw you in jail for at least a year or two and you $10,000. So anyway, we were going to send our best inviters, but by golly, we were going to make sure they did what we wanted, or we were going to throw them in the who's gal. So anyway, there's lots of things out there. It's a great discussion to have. It is a tool that the founders gave the states, that when the federal government began its overreach and you get the redress you wanted at the federal level, that it did provide this opportunity for the states then to rise up, propose their own amendments to rein back in the power of the federal government. And I think that you can vote on this on its merits and not on the fear. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further comments or questions? I'm interested in getting to the fire in the sky. We could use that for an hour or two to melt some snow. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief on and against the joint resolution. And we certainly have talked about this a lot in the past, and some is my first time, but the really is, in my view, over the years has been, we all share concern over significant problems and disunity and polarization and mission and debt and all of the concerns that have been laid out. And when you're confronted with these problems and you feel a sense of powerlessness, then you start looking for solutions. And this is something that is it's a heavy stick potentially that can make changes. The concern I have and have had over the years is, first of all, when I look at all the problems, my first thought is not, well, we've got all these problems, so we really need to fix the United States Constitution. That's not where I cast the blame. I don't see that incredible document drafted by folks that were amazingly enlightened and put together something that has withstood the ages and sustained a country as being the source of our problems. Nor are changes to it the cure for those problems. We look to it as some type of panacea that is going to resolve the national debt and enact term limits and create fiscal responsibility and make everybody that goes to Washington, D.C. all of a sudden honest, hardworking, collaborative, and cooperative, capable of being thoughtful and resourceful and appropriately frugal with the country's resources. I have no idea what you would write on a piece of paper that would make that happen, even if you were entering it into the United States Constitution. We're not going to change the nature of humanity. We're not going to change the nature of people we send there. And furthermore, any process we put forward simply asks that we appoint different individuals to then get together and theoretically propose solutions to the problems. Mr. Chairman, if these individuals exist somewhere that know how to work together and solve these problems, why wouldn't we just elect them here or to the United States Congress or to the presidency or to any of the powers, be them legislative or executive, that already exist and ask that they do the right thing? We want a proxy because we don't like the people we've already sent, but we're empowered as a democracy to change those people. The features that lead to the problems that we have are actually within our power to address. We can work on things like campaign finance reform. We can work on statutes and laws and better relationships and more transparency of information. Those are things that even this body is empowered with. So when we say that we all agree on some changes, first of all, I'll just note that we don't have universal agreement on all of these changes. If we did, they simply would have been a constitutional amendment because, once again, we already have a process that is straightforward. The process to amend the Constitution is not conceptually challenging right now. All you have to do is convince 2/3 of the state legislators, senators, that they need congresspersons, that they need to bring an amendment, and then get the states to pass it. No problem. If everyone agrees on it, that's easy. It's just that those things aren't out there. Once you start putting pen to paper, it turns out that changing that United States Constitution becomes a challenge. Now, possibility of a runaway convention. I realize that we're trying to cast this as ludicrous and absurd and that nothing bad could ever happen and that it would be fine for the state of Wyoming as it would be fine for all other states. Hopefully things would go well. But again, I see no guarantees. I know how we operate in this chamber. I know how legislating works. I know how working on agreements tends to go. And although there are procedures and rules in place, sometimes there are deviations, sometimes there are different decisions, sometimes there are agreements to go a different way. And to the extent that there really is no script written, Mr. Chairman, there's no idea of how many delegates do we get, who do we send? We don't know those answers. It would perhaps more comforting to know those answers, but honestly, even if we did, I don't know where a constitutional convention is going to solve all of our problems such that it would be worth us taking the risk and allowing significant amendments. You know, one thing that's often pointed out in this discussion is really the last big constitutional amendment was prior to our current constitution with the Articles of Confederation, which may or may not be a perfect analogy. It's hard to draw a perfect analogy. We know under those circumstances, it was a pretty significant rewrite. When you look at constitutions that have been drafted over the past, say, 5 decades, these are out there, these exist. There are constitutions that we can look at. The United States was involved in the drafting of a number of them. And over recent years, if you're interested in seeing some, I'll circulate them. They do not tend to show the wisdom that was demonstrated when our Constitution was drafted. They have a lot more words in them, tends to sound a lot more like legislation than Constitution. Rights are guaranteed, but only up until the point where they need the point where you're overridden by a legislature that knows better. Honestly, I can't imagine this body would pass the Fourth Amendment if it were written today, or the First Amendment if it were written today. It's not long enough. There aren't enough exception clauses. We like those. So again, I think everybody's probably made up their mind. I wanted to make sure that at least one member of this chamber stood up and voiced a little bit of opposition because I wasn't hearing any yet. I was hoping to. But on and against Senate Joint Resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Vice President Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, it's interesting that we're having this dialogue because this dialogue actually started after 1780 when they first sent the Constitution out. So I would like to share you some of the dialogue. It's called the Federalist Papers, designed to convince people to ratify the Constitution of the United States. So let me share what James Madison in his debate to the people of the United States said. And the paragraph labeled in Federalist number 44, the alleged dangers from the powers of the Union to state governments. Thus, each of the principal branches of federal government will owe its existence more or less to favor of the state governments and must constantly feel a dependence which is much more likely to beget a disposition of obsequious to the overbearing towards the states. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those are which to remain with the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, the liberties, the properties of the people, and the internal order, improved prosperity. That's what said we were supposed to have in a constitution and what it was supposed to do. Does anybody recognize that today? But you see, there was this provision in the Constitution that they foresaw at some time in the future that we might have a federal government that just goes off a little course. So they created this little thing called Article 5. Article 5 was designed specifically to address the issues when the federal government gets out of control. Madison articulated what the role of the federal government was and what the state's government. And it does not recognize anything like that today. That, Mr. Chairman, is why the founders gave us Article 5. We should use the Constitution. We should use the Constitution for the very purpose that the founders gave it to us. On and for the bill.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman,
Just going to ask. Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that we have another constitutional convention. Going to select a bunch of people to go there. There's several states will. They'll want to get something done. We know what a majority here would want to do and what a majority in some of the like-minded states want to do. But we're a very divided country. You want to get something done, Constitutional Convention, you're going to have to make some compromises. And what I ask you to think about is what compromises will be made. Will we have to put restrictions on our spending that will ensure a weak military? Within the charge. Will we have to make it easier to ratify international agreements like the Paris Accord so that they aren't subject to, if the blue side wins, we're in, and if the red side wins, we're out, and all the consequences that would have. There's quite a number of compromises you can think, well, that might be what you have to do to get what we want. Mr. Chairman, I asked you to think about that as you vote on this.
Further discussion, Senate. President Dockstader.
Thank you. My mind's going back to the late senator who used to sit in that corner and he'd stand up and say, some of my friends are for it, some of my friends are against it. I got a lot of friends on both sides of the fence on this one. This one's hard because, you know, I look at that document that we're talking about is divinely inspired. We have a country because of that. And so as I reflect on all the talk about this, I probably would say there are a lot of good arguments maybe to reconsider this time. Generally been a no. But at the same time, we're delving into something that for me is divinely inspired. And I want to be very, very careful about making any changes to something that could route us in another direction. I'm getting closer. I'm getting closer to this proposal. But if I err, I probably err on the side of saying, let's be very careful about reopening this document for consideration. So that's where I'll be with my vote. I think we're close. And on a lighter note, I look forward to the answers to what will be happening in those natural disasters. Thank you.
Vice President Hicks.
Mr. President, I think my colleague from Bates Creek makes a good point about what's the compromise. But I think, again, we look to history and find out what the compromise was. So let's go back to the Constitutional Convention. So what was the great compromise that came out there? It's called the United States Senate. That was the compromise in the large states that controlled the entire population, because the original proposal was to have one house. So the great compromise was that each state got 2 senators. Geez, I wonder where Wyoming would be today, Mr. Chairman, if there hadn't have been a great compromise with the Constitutional Convention to give the state of Wyoming equal footing with the state of California and the United States Senate. So compromise can be a good thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion. I sense you're ready for the question. First, let's let the provider. Senator Biteman, would you like to round it out?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senate, for another great debate. We are in historic times and we are in dangerous waters. I'm here to answer the call for my child's generation. And hopefully they'll look back on this as something that we did right and something that we can do to ensure that this great union of ours will last to see another 100 years. We've heard concerns about who goes. Well, we decide. We're the legislature. We get to decide who goes. How many go? Who goes? That's up to us as a body. Yes, we do have the 10th Amendment, and we need to use the 10th Amendment. We need to use it more than we're doing it. We also have to do this as well. We talked about an educated electorate will take care of the term limits problem. Last time I checked, Congress's approval ratings nearing single digits, but yet their incumbency factor is about 96%. We hate everybody as congressmen but our own. We elect their congressman and expects a different result. Balanced budget amendment hasn't been written yet. We don't know what it's going to look like. We need the best and brightest from all 50 states to get together and try to draft a balanced budget amendment that works for all of us. And if it comes out of that convention and we don't like it, we vote no. It takes 3/4 of the states to ratify. Armageddon, well, that could happen any day now, I suppose. But I'm tired of sitting around waiting for my fellow Americans to step up and do something. Like I said, when I came in office, the debt was 19 trillion. Now we're at 28 trillion and climbing. And that was because we took the do nothing approach. Well, are we going to continue that approach, or are we going to try to do something? Obviously, an Article 5 convention is a long game. It's going to take a long time to get to 34 states. To a convention, will we even see an amendment come out of the convention? Can we get a majority of the states there to agree on the language, to draft the language? That's something we can all agree on, to even send it out to the states. I'm guessing maybe term limits might be the only one that comes out of it. We've heard that changes are not the cure. Well, I would have to argue that the amendments to abolish slavery certainly were the cure. It cured it. It was over. So amendments do have value. They do have meaning. They do fix errors in the original document that I agree was divinely inspired. And we do have an amendment that limits the term of office for the president and vice president. And they follow that. We hear arguments that they don't follow the Constitution as written. Everybody's followed that one to a T. We haven't had to forcibly remove a president or vice president yet. And we certainly won't be forcibly removing congressmen and senators either if term limits gets passed. I believe that's everything. Yes, we are not going to change the fabric of this country by amending the Constitution, adding the 28th or 29th Amendment. We are sick as a nation. We are divided. And the cure for that goes well beyond this document. Our schools, our homes, and our churches. That's where we're going to heal this nation. But do the right thing. Vote aye.
Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion, when the committee of the whole rises to report, to do so with the favorable recommendation of Senate Joint Resolution 2, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Senator Anderson won the loudest. I have a question in my mind. Let's do a standing count, please. All those in favor, stand. All those opposed, please stand. I'm sorry, I'll say it again, because I heard myself, but you didn't hear me. Those aye on Senate Joint Resolution 2 was 14, those no was 16. Pursuant to SR 6.5, having failed a standing division vote, a roll call vote is required. The chief clerk will call the roll.
Roll call on Senate Joint Resolution 2. Anderson?
No.
No. Baldwin?
Aye.
Aye. Whitman?
Aye.
Aye. Boner?
Aye.
Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? No. French? No. Murphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? No. James?
No.
No. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? No. Cost? No. Landon? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? No. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. Steinmetz? No. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstader? No. Closing vote? Closing vote closed. Senate Joint Resolution 2, 14 aye, 16 no.
Senate Joint Resolution, excuse me, Senate Joint Resolution 2, having failed the roll call vote pursuant to SR 6-SA, is deemed indefinitely postponed. The next bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 4. The Region Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Joint Resolution 4, School Capital Construction Constitutional Amendment, sponsored by Senator Scott. A joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming for responsibility to construct.
You've been watching a debate of the Wyoming Senate on the Convention of States resolution. We had a narrow loss there, 14-16. We believe there was at least one senator who was not able to make it to the Capitol due to a blizzard that happened over the weekend. There was up to 4 feet of snowfall and 8 feet drifts across the state. We are not dead in Wyoming this year. We are expected to make a push in the Wyoming House as well. Our resolution is active on the House side. 15 states have already passed this resolution to call for a convention to propose amendments on 3 topics: fiscal restraints, term limits, and limits on federal overreach. Our resolution is currently being considered by an additional 22 states, including the Senate was supposed to vote Monday, but as I said, there was a blizzard over the weekend preventing that from happening until today. The Convention of States Wyoming Volunteer Patriots have held several town halls to build support across the state to eager crowds. They've been flooding the local radio station airwaves, put up billboards, and now all that work is paying off. They finally are going to get some consideration by the legislature. They did get a victory in a Senate committee before this on March 5th, and this has been great progress from the Wyoming team. Thank our sponsor, State Senator Bo Beitman, our other co-sponsors, and we look forward to more progress very soon. I think now we're going to have Rita Peters on, our constitutional attorney and legislative director, and I'll bring her on momentarily. Hey, Rita, how are you doing? We're live.
Hey, Producer G, I'm doing okay. Little bit disappointed by that.
I think your audio is not working. We'll come back to you, Rita. We're also expecting Regional Director Dave Schneider to join us directly. For those of you that want to stick around and talk about what just happened, what's ahead for Convention of States. Some of you may know that South Carolina is going to have a committee hearing tomorrow, Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Convention of States Action President Mark Meckler is expected to testify at that hearing, and the Convention of States South Carolina team has been doing an amazing work. Let's try Rita Peters again, our constitutional attorney and legislative director. Rita, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. How's that, Producer G? Can you hear me now?
Well, first it goes back to the
Oh, try that again, Rita. I'm sorry.
local.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
We had
Okay, well, that was a disappointing vote. It was very close, but I think we can safely say that the Wyoming Senate did not manage to do the will of the people of Wyoming there today. And that, of course, is really disappointing. If you recall, we just recently had a committee hearing that was March 5th in the Committee on Minerals, Business, and Economic Development. And they voted to advance our Article 5 resolution by a vote of 3-2, which is why the full Wyoming Senate got a chance to vote on it today. The committee vote followed an earlier hearing in which several COS Wyoming volunteers showed up at the Capitol to testify in favor of our resolution. They did an amazing job. Everyone was very impressed with them. And this is a disappointing day for the Wyoming Senate. As I think you mentioned, though, Producer G, we are not dead in Wyoming. There is a House resolution that has been filed on the House side by Representative Dan Larson. So Wyoming isn't completely out of the picture yet. I should mention, too, we had the maximum number of legislative co-sponsors signed on this resolution. So it did enjoy great support in the Wyoming Senate, but unfortunately, fear went out today.
Yes, that was very disappointing, but the Wyoming team has been just making tremendous strides the past several weeks. Can we say anything more about what they've done of late?
Oh, they have done it all. Everything from showing up at the hearing. They've been hosting town halls all over the state to make people aware and let their legislators know that they wanted support for this resolution. They put up billboards in the state thanks to donations from generous individuals who cared so deeply about this. And they've been on the radio talking about it. So they've really done everything. They did all the right things. But sometimes it just takes a little more time than we would like for the legislators to come to understand that this is the will of the people. We are ready for the states to use their constitutional power under Article 5 to rein in the federal government and to stop federal overreach. You know, Senator Case said, he spoke very eloquently in support of our resolution there in the Wyoming Senate today. He said, you know, look at the landscape in America. This is more needed now than ever, he said. He also pointed out, I thought this was really interesting, that the opposition emails that the Wyoming senators have been getting are by and large not coming from Wyoming citizens. They're coming from out of state. And I think that's very telling. And we need to make sure that all of our state legislators, whatever state you're in, make sure they know when you reach out to them that you are their constituent and you expect them to do the will of the people in their own state, not some special interests or lobbyists in some other state. Thought that was really telling.
Absolutely, and we're still waiting Regional Director David Schneider to join us. We're just standing by for that. But can we fact check anything from this debate today, Rita? You know, we had some great support, as you said, the maximum amount of co-sponsors. What about the opposition? Was there anything that stood out to you that you would like to answer?
Well, there weren't that many, only a couple senators actually spoke in opposition, and I did take issue with some of the things that Senator Rothfuss said. For instance, I made some notes while he was speaking. He said, you know, when you look at the things that are going wrong in this country, look at the problems in this country, you can't cast the blame on the Constitution. And he said, if we went into a convention for proposing amendments, he said, I have no idea what we would write to correct the solution. I would suggest, Producer G, that he should think harder and maybe listen to some constitutional experts and conservative scholars who have actually put a lot of time and thought into this, because there are a lot of ways we can, with simple and clear, modernly worded amendments, there are a lot of corrections that we can make. And, you know, he said, we're not going to change the nature of humanity with an amendment. Well, no, we're not going to change the nature of humanity. That's why we need the amendments, because we can't change the nature of humanity. But by amendments, we can tighten restrictions on the federal government. I'll give just one example. The General Welfare Clause in the Constitution, Congress has just completely run away with that and taken that to mean that Congress can spend money on anything that it thinks is a good idea. So we can use an amendment to really narrow down Congress's spending power. Of course, that's going to help the situation. Senator Rothfuss also said, well, we're just mad because we don't like the people we sent, so we should send different people to Congress. Well, wrong. You know, year after year, we vote and we send good people, but the problem that we have now is a structural problem. And while there's nothing wrong with the Constitution, we can make things better by proposing amendments that will correct the bad Supreme Court precedents that have just opened the floodgates to federal overreach. So I strongly disagree with almost everything he said. I think he's just wrong.
Well, the great irony is that Article 5 has been successfully used on a number of occasions to correct errors in the federal government, and we see that these amendments are followed. I mean, think of the abolishment of slavery was brought up, women's right to vote, term limits on the president. We can see that Article 5 has been effective through history in correcting these abuses.
Absolutely. If you look at any of the recent, you know, it seems like the more recent the amendment, the more closely it's followed. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because when amendments are made, they're generally, you know, very specific language, and they're modern language. You know, the word general, for instance, as it's used in the General Welfare Clause, today means something that's a lot broader and even different than what it meant when it was used in constitutional language. Usually the word general in the Constitution means it's something that applies to all the states as opposed to just a single state. Well, today we think general means just, you know, kind of broad and nebulous and vague. And so you can see why things get out of control with these misinterpretations of constitutional language. And this is exactly why amendments can help, as long as they are framed within the subject matter of, for instance, our resolution, which requires that any amendment proposals be on the subject matter of imposing fiscal restraint on Washington, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and imposing term limits. That's all that would be germane for amendment proposals at an Article 5 convention called pursuant to our resolution. That's exactly what we need.
Absolutely. And it looks like we do have Regional Director David Schneider online with us. I'm going to try to bring him into the broadcast.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, how are you doing, Rita?
I'm doing all right. Why don't you give us your perspective on what just happened in the Wyoming Senate? I know it was a disappointment, but what stood out to you today from that floor debate and vote?
Well, I tell you, Senator Beitman, our sponsor, did an amazing job on the floor leading the debate today. He really laid out the case and the fact that it was time to call a convention of states. There shouldn't let fear run the decision making in Wyoming. And there was really good debate in the fact that the way the debate worked, I think it came out pretty good. Unfortunately, we had a couple of folks that had committed to us, or at least we believed them to be in the yes column, went the other way today, and we lost by 2 votes, right? So we needed 16, we got 14. And we had a lot up in the air today, and we actually did pretty good with the people that we really concentrated with as far as what we consider target individuals, because going into the vote, I think we had like 7 folks that were really in the air. We got over half of those, and I was really happy to see that with the team and their efforts and what they were able to do. Again, the debate was pretty good on the floor. Unfortunately, fear ruled the day in Wyoming. The only Democrat, his argument actually won out today, which is sad to see Wyoming following the Democrat. The only one in the Senate lead on this particular subject matter. He sounded just like the John Birch Society and their talking points as far as being very fearful of the process and not knowing what this was going to lead to. And it's pretty interesting to kind of hear his perspective. I don't know, Rita, did you have any other specific questions as far as today?
I just want to comment on what you just said. They say that politics makes strange bedfellows, but yeah, isn't it something how hearing after hearing, debate after debate, what we see here is the leftist radicals who want the floodgates to remain open. They want this big, massive overreaching federal government team up with these misguided souls on the right, the far right, the John Birch Society folks, to defeat this measure, which is, Article 5 is part of our Constitution, and it was put there for this very purpose, to enable the states to bypass Congress and put meaningful restraints back on the federal government. So Dave, question for you, was there anything in the testimony either for or against the resolution that really stood out to you today?
I think, again, I point back to Senator Beitman as far as his efforts and his focus on the debt. When he came into office, he mentioned it at $17 trillion, and it's now over $10 trillion higher in just a short amount of time. And he made the case specifically, and how long are we going to wait? How long are we going to sit on the sideline? This is a tool that the founders of our country gave to us as legislators, and he was speaking in the legislature at that point, to use. And sitting on the sidelines has not gotten us anywhere. We got to use all the tools in the tool bag, not limit ourselves to any one particular one. And this is certainly something that was put there for a reason. And unfortunately, the Senate today in Wyoming decided not to pull out that tool, and we're able to listen to the fear mongering and went along that route again. So on that point, it was certainly disheartening. But there was a lot of great that came out of today. Just the grassroots and their efforts in Wyoming has just absolutely been amazing to see. The fact that we were able to pull in, 60 folks for a committee hearing in Cheyenne, Wyoming, of all places. If you have ever looked at a map of Wyoming, it's a very big state, and their Capitol building is in the corner, in the very south and east of the state. It takes about 5 hours to get from corner to corner, and that's where our state director lives. And I know he's been holed up in a motel room the last few days, waiting for this vote to happen. He came down on Sunday, was stuck in that huge blizzard in Cheyenne. Those of you who haven't been watching the news, Cheyenne had over 4 feet of snow on Saturday, Sunday, And he was about an hour and a half out when they shut down the interstate and was stuck in a hotel. And they just opened the Capitol today. So they really delayed this vote for a couple days with all the snow removal that had to happen for these members just to get to town. It's been absolutely craziness. And just to see the efforts that our grassroots that showed up even today at the Capitol building in light of all these setbacks that have happened in the state, it's just been amazing to watch.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned our great sponsor there in Wyoming, Senator Beitman, and I wrote down a quote from him. He said, "I'm here to answer the call for my child's generation." And I thought that was a beautiful moment. And that's what we need our state legislators to do. We need them to stand up, to face down this fear that's being peddled mostly by the radical left, and we need them to answer the call to restore the republic for future generations. Dave, what happens next in Wyoming?
Well, the good news is we're not done yet. I'm never done, right? So we have a joint a companion bill that we filed in the House in Wyoming, and we're going to try to see if we can get that thing some life and have another vote starting on the House side very, very quickly with our sponsor over there, which is Representative Dan Larson. He's been a longtime champion for Convention of States, and he's gathered a bunch of co-sponsors on the House side and is ready to roll, and was just kind of waiting for the Senate to play out as far as the process there. We're looking fairly good on the House side, and who knows if we can get this thing rolled through quickly. We can perhaps maybe change a mind or two in the Senate and be able to come back over the Senate really fast with a second opportunity. I always like to keep those second opportunities around just in case. And in this case, we have an election next year, and we really would like to get all these state representatives on record as far as how they stand on Convention of States. Some of them have been hiding from us, and it's time to put them in front of a vote and make them take a stance.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, we're going to let you go because we know you're not done. You have more work to do, and we all appreciate you being on the ground there in Wyoming, and we're praying for you and praying for the future of our country. Thanks for being with us, Dave.
We'll see you guys.
Well, everyone, a sleeping giant has awoken. We, the people, are fed up with seeing politicians go to DC and just continue to expand the power of the federal government. And we know that Congress is not going to vote to limit its own power. Calling a convention of states under the authority of Article 5 of the Constitution is the only real solution. And our movement of over 4 million Americans is catching the attention of media outlets across the country. You know, last month alone, Convention of States was featured in 104 videos and broadcast outlets, 377 podcast and radio hits, and a whopping 1,898 print or online mentions. We're breaking through the socialist censors with the truth. Our founding fathers left us with a peaceful constitutional method to rein in big government overreach, and it's called calling an Article 5 Convention of States. It takes just 34 states passing matching resolutions to call the convention, and we've already passed in 15 states. Even better, Joe Biden and his cronies in Congress can't do a thing to stop us. This is the state's power to go around Washington, D.C. and get needed, meaningful restorations of the restraints on federal power. Right now, our legislation is active in 20 states, and we're expecting critical votes to happen in a matter of days. So here's what you can do. Go to conventionofstates.com, share the petition, and join your Convention of States team. You'll be glad you did. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. Eastern Time. Convention of States President Mark Meckler will be testifying before a South Carolina subcommittee, and it will be a really important hearing. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.